Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, number 56, with Eric Olsen from Helix Education. It was super fun chatting with Eric, kind of catching up with him and talking about podcasting and kind of talking shop of online digital education stuff. We work in similar spaces there. So really appreciate all that Eric shared and just the energy that he brought to the show, and just getting to know him a little bit better and being able to share out this great conversation that hopefully kind of energizes you like it did for me. So check out everything that we mentioned in the episode down the show notes as usual. And without further ado, please enjoy this episode number 56 with Eric Olsen. All right. Well, I appreciate you, Eric, making some time for the show here. I think this is a long overdue chat I've been looking forward to. So, I know a bit about your background and everything, but you just want to do kind of our usual spiel here in terms of like your introduction, who you are, and your professional journey of how you got to be where you are today.
Awesome. Thrilled to be here, Dustin. You're one of my favorite people and my favorite brains. So glad that this is a good excuse just to talk to you, and I'm glad we're recording it in case it's helpful for other people. Sure. So my background in general, prior to higher ed, I was an ad agency guy, copywriter, creative director for B2B and B2C ad agencies around the Chicagoland area. Moved to higher education almost 10 years ago now because I thought higher ed was on the precipice of making high quality education free to the world, and we were like just on the precipice of the democratization of higher education. If you ask me 10 years later, I'll still say I think we're almost just there. It was a slower process than I thought, but I ended up going, falling backwards into a generous community that I'm super proud to be a part of. Worked at Lewis University, mid-sized private Catholic school in Chicago, most recently as their director of enrollment communications. At the time, I was also writing for higheredlive.com, which I'm sure most listeners are familiar with. Became friends with Seth Odell. He came out to Salt Lake City to be GM of marketing at Helix Education, which is an OPM, an online program management provider in the higher education space, meaning Helix helps launch, grow, and manage online programs on behalf of universities. He came out here to be GM. He needed someone on the corporate marketing side to run that division and help kind of brand Helix in the market. Because of that relationship formed from saying, yeah, I'll be a guest writer. And I know you do a lot of similar things on your side, Dustin. So I love that from a generosity of spirit and helping make everyone smarter. I think it's a really good idea from a selfless standpoint. There are also some real networking opportunities that come from that as well. So I came and followed Seth out here from Lewis. I loved what I was doing at Lewis. Love it even more at Helix in terms of getting to do that same kind of thoughtful enrollment growth strategy at scale for a lot of partners. So I've been at Helix for about 3.5 years. I run our brand strategy, content creative, and corporate marketing teams here at Helix.
Very cool. Yeah, and we're just like generally in like similar spheres of the higher ed world, and like you doing your own podcast as well. And we'll link out the stuff to have everybody be able to check it out and everything. And like we got connected through the content that you're producing, and just like doing these things like that can like build your professional network or lead to another opportunity. Yeah, certainly like an advocate for that, because it's been really nice for myself, because it is just like I'm consuming a lot of things and I'll be thinking about it and being able to articulate it in a way that other people would understand. It's like it's a good exercise for me in terms of like writing, or when I'm speaking with somebody about stuff on the podcast. So sometimes it is almost just like, oh, it's almost in a certain way like selfish, like it's like it helps me to like sort through things, but then like having a generous spirit when I'm not just like keeping it in a draft on my blog. It's like, no, I want this to get out there. I'd love for people to find it useful and relevant, and I'm glad that many people do. So it's
boy, let's stay there and talk about that for a second, because I think you're hitting on something really important, especially for similar like-minded geeks who are listening to this and probably are empathetic to podcasting in general. You're right. I think if you tell someone, do these things and think of yourself long term as this media company and this very selfish thing. It's not going to work. But in general, the idea, I think for both of us, podcasting seemed fun. It seemed like you'd learn a new skill. What comes out of it. So for me, the podcast that I run via Helix is Enrollment Growth University, where I am interviewing typically a C-level leader of a college or university about some sort of enrollment growth strategy they are experimenting with or playing with at their institution, whether that's an academic one, whether that's an enrollment growth strategy, whether that's research-based, whether that is programmatic. And what it's meant to me in terms of, I'm just curious and like meeting people and like learning new things, but it has been incredibly helpful for me professionally, not just the network of now I'm 84 weeks in and I've had 84 conversations with 84 of the smartest people in higher ed, and like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. But I'm learning what everyone is doing best at their institution. And I'm learning from Stanford, and I'm learning from Dartmouth, and I'm learning from Iowa College and these small guys too. And there is so much creativity in higher ed. And generous people willing to say, hey, you all should be doing this too, but we're either siloed or working on other things. And so me personally getting to understand, hey, if I'm going to start, Ramsdell University or Olsen University, what should it look like? I have a kind of good idea now from seeing what all these different individuals have discovered as best practices. So yeah, in terms of the Machiavellian, start a podcast so that you can get a better job. Like please don't do that. But it might happen if your real intentions are just deep curiosity.
I think that a good little asterisk on it is yes, don't purely do it just to further your own goals. Yeah. Because it's I think people will see through that, because I think that is I think broadly, because now it's everybody has a podcast. It's either it's at best it's okay, you're clearly just doing this to further your brand. It's not an awful show, but maybe not the most creative thing. And then other people who are genuinely I don't care what happens with this, I would do it anyway if I'm not even getting anything from it, kind of thing, just because it's good conversations and just generously sharing them out and those sort of things. So
no, it's the most annoying thing I do in terms of, oh God, Monday's coming again and I need something. It's also the most rewarding thing I do. The other one I've been experimenting with, again for Helix over the last 4 months now, is going to a daily. So Enrollment Growth Briefing is a daily, really just content creation. Similarly, not interviewing people. Just similarly, reading the Chronicle, reading Inside Higher Ed, reading EdSurge, reading all these EDU pubs, and really just serving as this curation, specific to enrollment growth strategies. And again, it's one of those things where it's boy, I wish someone else was doing this, that I wouldn't have to, but I would totally listen to this. And so creating the podcast or creating the media entity or execution that you wish existed in the world is, again, yes, a much better strategy than, what's in this for me.
Kind of just serving others sort of thing. So very good.
Absolutely.
Well, I guess I'm curious because, we kind of have the Venn diagram of this show is both the higher ed and the geeky stuff. So obviously we often have guests who work in higher ed, so that kind of checks off that box kind of thing. But I always do like to ask people too, because many people, it's they catch the bug when they're an RA or they do something in higher ed, so they continue that path. You came through a different route, which I think is equally valuable. That it's not as if obviously this is such special sauce that only people who have only worked in higher ed could ever understand it. It's you worked for an ad agency, you came in and you were kind of intrigued and wanted to pursue this field and those sort of things. So at least in part of your origin story, as I like to call it, is there anything even just lessons learned, people you met, or anything like that, I guess, just from your college experience, anything that comes to mind that is still salient to you personally and or professionally? I'm always just curious, I guess, in terms of these are the type of things that we might want our students, that people are working with to sort of hopefully take away, anything, I guess, that comes to mind.
Yeah, you wouldn't have wanted me as a 22-year-old. I do not think you would have seen. You might have seen some very raw potential, but you would have seen someone who had just jumped in the river and was just letting it carry him downstream. So the reason I chose college was because I was the drummer of a jam band in Chicago, and my lead singer decided to go to Bradley University in Central Illinois. and I looked up their website, saw they had a marketing program, and I'm like, all right, I'll just follow him down there. It was that thoughtlessly, Dustin. It was literally a 30-second conversation. And if you're asking me why was I even looking for a marketing program, it's because I was a golfer, and I thought that you golfed as a marketing person. It has been 15 years since choosing that. I have never golfed once in my marketing career. So there is some serendipity there where I didn't know what marketing was. I was a journalist for my college paper, which gave me a lot of great writing experience. Social media and SEO were just starting to come out in a significant way when I was in college. And so I was obsessed with that. But again, very, very thoughtless, unconscious, non-awakened, non-enlightened Eric. Got a call from a local agency summer before my senior year and asked if I wanted to be a copywriting intern. And I went home and Googled, what does a copywriter do? Is that one of those trademark people? And then I saw that, a copywriter is like, it's like a marketing strategist who is really good at advertising and also a really good writer. I'm like, oh my goodness, like that exists? So again, serendipity, divinity, luck, coincidence, chance. It ended up just presenting itself to me as this thing that this is the overlap of the art and science of persuasion is super interesting to me, and writing was my first love. And so that's what I fell into. In terms of higher ed originally, I met my wife at my first institution, my undergraduate institution. Got set up with my internship at agencies, and it really just launched me into this professional world. So I always had a love and appreciation for my undergraduate education. As I started in the professional world, I found myself drawn to smart people. I was this curious person who wanted to get smarter. And I noticed that a lot of my favorite people and my favorite thinkers were professors and lecturers, and they wrote books. And I'm like, boy, there is something about that environment of a campus environment that I think if I want to be around the smartest people I can, I might find them at an institution. And again, as I mentioned before, this concept of, I really thought, MOOCs were just coming out, Udacity and Coursera were playing around, Harvard X and things like that, where it's like, I'm going to be able to go to Harvard graduate school for free and get a credential in like 2007. And of course, that still hasn't happened yet. But that idea of higher ed is very close to tipping, and I think all the smartest people were there. It seemed just to me to be the best place to be around the smartest minds. And I absolutely have found that, and that has proven itself true.
Very cool. Very cool. And just almost like, that awareness and hindsight of just like kind of, being grateful for that serendipity and everything. I guess just like, that something was, drawing you to this, to marketing and everything. Like, obviously, it's thought it was like more golf based, which it's not. I guess some people make it that way. But
please, someone invite me golfing. Like, I want my 17-year-old reality and dream to come true.
Yeah. Well, and I guess you maybe kind of alluded to that. Like you're just like a very curious person. So you're at least now in this role, at least you're talking to people a lot and learning things that way. Like, I guess. Just in terms of your current work, like those are the things like maybe like you obviously had to, I don't know if that was originally part of your role, like you maybe had to like kind of ask for that to be something that you could work on, like, but I don't know, just sort of those things in terms of your current work, like is an environment that you felt encouraged to, work on these new things, and that's what's really kept you like engaged with it. Because I think, the space is like still growing and like kind of like figuring things out in terms of like OPMs and how we work with universities and those sort of things. So yeah, I mean, this kind of like sort of like Wild West of like, higher ed, is sort of what's happening. But like what keeps you engaged currently with your work and maybe just like your environment or just any of those things that are top of mind. I think you've kind of alluded to it.
Oh, no. I have so many new thoughts, Dustin, and I'll just start diving in, and feel free to redirect me. Yeah, so Carol Dweck, most of you guys might be familiar with her and this concept of growth mindset and this idea of, avoiding stasis and always learning and always changing. And I'm reading this stuff, and I'm like, how have people gotten this far without a growth mindset. And I realized they've been able to if they're in an industry that changes slowly. The benefit of being a marketer. So again, when you talk about like Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers and what was unique to your story, graduating college, in the early 2000s, and being the low man on the totem pole at an ad agency, was no one wanted to understand what that book face thing actually was, and how do you get on Google, and what is SEO, and things like that. And so it was, you were the low man on a totem pole and had to figure this out for the executives because they were starting to get asked those questions by clients and they didn't have good answers to it. And so not because of my skill set, but because I didn't have one, was I forced to gain these really strong digital chops, pre-marketing going digital. And so, I graduated at a very unique time where everything was changing. And the reality of the last 15 years of my marketing career is that everything has changed every year. Marketing principles have not changed. The art of persuasion has not changed. But where do you leverage your marketing dollars? How do you play with marketing attribution? What is this mix of smart media buying versus just high-end creative? When does the right column of Facebook start to look like white noise, so those ads no longer work? That is changing so quickly, that marketing is such a fun field to be in, because even if you are at the top of your game right now, if you go check out for 2 years, you're a 50%er. And so what I love about marketing in general is that it forces you to maintain that Carol Dweck growth mindset. What I love about the OPM business, and in general, Helix's clientele, which are wonderful tier 2 private institutions who have great stories to tell and have historically not been great about telling them, are nervous right now in terms of, we're seeing a lot of consolidation of private institutions specifically. And so when I am working with my partners at Helix, they typically, don't have huge brand recognition outside of their state. And so the marketing challenge is a true marketing challenge. And it is, I can't just have the same online offering as some of the elites or some of the big online players. I've got to be a lot better. I have to be a lot more creative. I have to have a lot better student experience. I have to be a lot more strategic. I have to have really solid enrollment operations. I have to have high touch communication, personalization strategies. You have to do not anything magic, but you better do everything right. And so that reality to me, outside of higher ed, if I'm not in higher ed 20 years from now, I've had to think very holistically about, creating a great student experience is not a higher ed problem. It is a business problem in general. And in order to get some of these schools that deserve to win to stay the winners, they need to kind of rethink how they do business. And the things that worked for them 20 years ago, I would argue worked in spite of them even. I think demographics were in higher ed's favor for 20 years, and those days are over. There are less students graduating high school in 2022 than there were in 2015. And so, what does that look like? You're not going to get 8% growth anymore just because of demographics. So you're going to have to fight for it, and you're going to have to be really smart about it. And so being in an environment where I'm forced to think through what does a college that exists in 2050 look like, as well as how do I hit my false start this year, that mix of short-term and long-term thinking is a privilege, a joy, and an honor to come to work for and try to solve those problems every day.
Yeah. Well, because I think this happens with like students, like what you're saying of like, you've got a tall order in front of you, but it's like, it's good work to be doing. And it's like the journey, and those sort of things. It's like those high expectations, like it's the same thing. You put those on students. It's like, yeah, they're often going to work really hard to measure to your high expectations and those sort of things. And like you said, like certain places just kind of resting on their laurels and just kind of sitting back. It's like, there was a time where that, like kind of worked well enough or whatever. But yeah, there's just like such an opportunity now to at least just make sure that we're, helping these institutions manifest the great work that they're doing in the digital space. And, if that's just kind of like a buoy, for people, because it is just like, I think for me, it's always like a weird thing where I'm like, yeah, there's so much competition, it's so hard, and like, but just working, working as much as you can to help work towards that goal, because I know too, it's like this is the only way that this is going to work out in terms of like having more institutions doing high quality digital education, because it's like there's so many people that like never got their bachelor's or like need to further their career professionally with a graduate degree and those sort of things. So like, there's like a lot of work to be done here. So it's like just all these people who are coming together to kind of commit to doing it. It's important, and it's like the only way that we're going to like educate and train more people to do the jobs that we need them to do for, like you said, for the future, just looking ahead. So, we have to kind of lay that groundwork down now.
Let's have some get real talk here too, Dustin, in terms of, I think we both mentioned this idea of this new competitive reality that we're in. We're not even close to what the real competitive reality is going to be. We've had to start getting nervous for the first time in higher ed's history. But even when you look at online programs that both of you and I work in, 75% of students are still coming within 100 miles of campus, even if they're studying online. Students, I would argue, are not making fully rational choices yet. It is not like we're all going to an online marketplace like Amazon and looking at reviews, typing in some words that are important to me and seeing, this 365 value brand is obviously the best brand, best education, employers value it, and it's at a pretty good price. We are still playing within a much smaller competitive set than we probably need be in terms of a student really making the best decision for themselves. But as that continues to change, as more of these college students grow up digital natives and Gen Z and Alpha, we're going to see I don't think I really care that the school that I go to is 30 miles away from me. If I can get a very similar respected degree for 40% of the price. And while we're starting to see the very beginnings of that, the real competition in higher ed happens as the consumer becomes hyper rational. And again, in every industry, it's slower than we think it's going to be. But we mentioned this competitive angst that a lot of our institutions have right now. Next 10, 15, 20 years, if we move to a online education majority world where people have less care about if their on-campus version of their college has a football team or not, the game is drastically going to change. And so our institution can't take 3%, 5%, 8% improvements. We have to make principled decisions about what college looks like in 2050, and that's an exciting challenge that I love being a part of.
Yeah, very cool. Just in terms of like, I think, you've mentioned like we're sort of just similar in the sense of being both geeks and higher ed geeks, whatever you kind of want to call it, sort of thing, in terms of just like the personality and the way that think about things and just sort of like the passion and everything. So and not getting too stuck up, because sometimes I'm like, oh, is that like more like nerdy or geeky or dorky or whatever, like, but it's just generally like that. I've committed to obviously like higher ed geek in terms of that way that I've kind of described it, of like, really being curious, really being passionate, really delving deep into the things that matter. So if it is more so like professionally related in terms of things that are really like grabbing your attention, or just like personal fun stuff, like what are you geeking out about right now? Like, is it newer things that you just discovered, or stuff that you've always been into? Just anything that is grabbing your attention. We can certainly make sure that we're kind of giving a tip of the hat to anything in particular that we'd want to put in the show notes. But I guess just broad strokes here to start out, and then we can kind of dig in.
Yeah, and so the benefit of me, interviewing these brilliant minds in higher ed over the last 84 weeks and counting is that I'm being exposed to what institutions are doing differently. And I think a couple of the biggest things that I'm excited about are seeing institutions bridge stronger partnerships and relationships with industry in terms of we are graduating students that employers are fundamentally saying are unprepared to hit the ground running for us. And so there is a gap here in terms of what higher ed is graduating, in terms of what we think is important, especially from a liberal arts standpoint of what a well-rounded student ought to be, versus an employer who says, yeah, we want someone who is valuable to us on day one. And how do we better bridge that gap? How do we better incorporate employer feedback in improving our curriculum? And so some of the most exciting stories I've seen from that, a couple examples off the top of my head, Eastern Washington University was launching a new data analytics program. And they're in Spokane, Washington, and or near it, and Microsoft is a leading employer in that area. And so instead of their faculty sitting in a room and deciding what should a data analytics program be, they called Microsoft. Microsoft spent 7 weeks with their faculty saying, if your curriculum is like this, we would hire every single one of your graduates sight unseen. And it was a no-brainer win-win. It was why are not we working with the employers that we want to hire our students eventually to help inform what the curriculum should be and not dictate it. This isn't just a Microsoft training ground. That's not what our colleges are turning into. But if we're ignoring those voices altogether, how can we be surprised that these employers, and especially the prominent employers, are underwhelmed by the graduates that were graduating? And so they spun this program up 7 months from that first meeting. They were enrolling new students in it. These students now get this data analytics degree from Eastern Washington, as well as 4 Microsoft certifications that are typically and historically were like a part of that new hire's first year and a half in order to get those. But now they come in first day with them. And so it's a no-brainer win-win. Similarly, the University of Memphis I had on the show a couple months ago, and they talked about their relationship with FedEx and how FedEx is now offering completely free subsidized tuition for all of their employees as a recruitment incentive, as a employee retention incentive as well. And so I think a lot of us hear stories like that. We're like, Disney and Arizona State and FedEx and Memphis, they sure are lucky. When you talk to what University of Memphis did to secure that relationship, they bent over backwards to understand what FedEx's problems were from a retention and recruitment and upskilling standpoint, and fundamentally created an entirely new product for that partnership. And in so doing, there's a fairly good chance, or a reasonable chance, that 30% of their student base will be FedEx employees in the next 5 years. And those students they're graduating will, not have an incredible amount of student debt. But we're seeing a lot of these corporate partnerships where tuition is moving from student debt driven to employer sponsored. And so a lot of our issues of, the ethical crises in terms of we're getting all these dropouts who have, 80 grand in debt and no credential to show for it, and shame on us. These corporate partnerships where you have all these employers who are doing everything they can to recruit good talent, including free tuition. What I'm excited about is working with our partners to be those institutions who are not just, hey, yeah, send students our way and, we'll give you 3% off tuition. It's like, okay, they can get that anywhere. But what can we really give them in terms of understanding what their upskilling issues are, what their current workforce has from a talent standpoint that they need, and how do we create programs specifically for these employers that help solve their problems? And is that a better reflection of what higher ed needs to be? So that is probably the thing that I'm geeking out at the most at Helix right now. A lot of us are talking about that. We're hiring a lot more of those corporate partnership specialists at Helix to help design those programs with our partners. So in terms of the future of higher education that got me into the industry, yeah, I think free, democratized, adaptive learning education where Harvard decides out of the goodness of their heart to let me put it on my resume, even though I didn't pay them anything. I do think that'll happen eventually. I think this kind of shorter term is this student debt-driven industry moving to an employer-subsidized education is something that's really exciting to me. One other one that I just had on the podcast a couple days ago, so it won't come out for a couple weeks, is I talked to the president of Brigham Young University Pathway Worldwide. And their major curriculum difference stemmed from the fact that Brigham Young University is in Salt Lake City, Utah, and so they have a lot of Mormon students. And so a lot of these male Mormon students will go on a mission directly after high school, and they'll come back, when they're 24, 25, and start going to school. And so historically, we've told those adult students now, okay, yeah, so go to school full time for the next 4 years and don't earn a livable wage until you're 29 years old. That is incredibly unrealistic for the great many people. So their unique circumstances of these post-mission students force them to say, we have to give these students a certificate earlier in the process. And so they flipped gen eds and the major specific courses so that a year and a half in, their students have a certificate in business management or marketing or computer science or music so that they can get a serviceable job while they, spend the next 2.5 years, knocking off some of their gen eds. And just that flipping from a financial standpoint for the student, has been completely game changing. From a persistence standpoint, the students who are not doing that cert first path have a 65% graduation rate. For the cert first students, they have an 85% graduation rate. And so it's a lot of these things where, in terms of, if you ask me, what is the future of higher ed? Again, I go to my, my online will save everything. But you see these certain institutions who have had to go in survival mode because they're going to die, and they come up with incredibly creative solutions. Or you have this, interesting religious student base where that forces us to create this very interesting solution that perhaps the rest of higher ed, who are not, trying to service these same ex-mission students, should consider, flipping around, the order of our curriculum. And so, again, I think it's this combination of if we do a better job, and again, it's what you're doing and what I'm doing in terms of how do we shine spotlights on the best ideas in higher ed so that we can get to this inevitable end game quicker. And so, yeah, if I got to pick one, this idea of corporate partnerships and the idea that will, the top 200 employers in America fund 60% of students in the next 10 years? To me, I think the answer is yes. And I think that changes everything. And I think if you're not focused and sprinting toward that as an institution, as an educational partner, you're going to be missing out.
Yeah. No, that's a really good, takeaway or something for people to kind of marinate on is that potential. Cause I think, the unemployment numbers have been, they're at all-time lows in terms of recruitment and retention of employees, really competitive benefits like that being valuable. So it's sort of in their best interests and the best interest of, training people to the jobs that we need them to do in the future. And, because it is also right now, this evaluation of is higher ed a public good? Should it just be, invested in and supported and those sort of things? And it seems like right now there's a lot of traction with just okay, it's sort of you kind of get the home field advantage of okay, you live in New York, you've come through high school, you're more of the quote unquote traditional age. You can go to a community college or public institution for free, and then you have to stay for a while in the state and those sort of things. So but that idea of freeing from those chains of just I don't want to have to be here, or also I'm an adult learner, and adult learners are now kind of the new normal. So it's these people who are working at companies that have these benefits, and making sure that the positioning programs to be accessible online and high quality, and fitting the needs of what people want to pursue, and like you said, depending on I want to get this certification or this certificate or these sort of things. I've known that, to be like really important because like sometimes it is just like, oh, I'm just getting an MBA. I can't get like, anything else kind of baked into that. Like,
Right.
It's like, that's almost like passe at this point. Cause it's like, well, I need that and like a concentration
Yeah.
or I need to be able to like kind of distinguish it maybe a little bit more. So, even, it's just like a persistence thing. It's like, you've earned this, like you've put in a lot of hard work already. And now like for a little bit more, you'll now get like, the next part of it, like you kind of get the certification to say like, okay, whatever the focus is, but then kind of the ultimate goal being like the, the master's degree or something like that.
Right,
So
right,
that's
exactly.
really interesting. Yeah. Cause I think that again, just like I was saying, I mean, that just like connected dots in my head of just like, yeah. Okay. Like, cause I've just known again, just like experience with students, like asking those kind of questions. And, I think it's often not like a deal breaker for them, but I mean, certainly just providing more value for them to be aware of like, again, like working with potential employers for the types of certifications and things they would need, or at least just honoring the feelings that they have of wanting to be able to distinguish themselves further for the types of jobs that they would want to be able to say that like my MBA is concentrated in like, international finance, or something like that. So, really interesting stuff.
Yeah. And similarly, I sat down for a haircut the other day, and my hairstylist asked me what I did. And he said, "Oh, I'm thinking about going back to school." And I'm like, "Oh, what do you want to study?" He's like, "Well, I kind of want to study computer science or programming." And I said, "All right, you are either in luck or in trouble, because I'm about to just yell at you for about 35 minutes about all your options." And he left very grateful about it. But I realized that, boy, we have a lot of knowledge about very different kinds of options and models in terms of, I think there was a lot of practicality in that idea of like, I think I want to be a coder. Is it because you love coding, or is it because you think that's a better job than being a hairstylist in terms of, monetary or whatever you want your future life to be? And so these students are half picking out of passion, half picking out of practicality. There are a whole lot of ways to skin that cat. And so I gave him a bunch of them, and I could tell, I think he left extraordinarily confused. But a lot of these students don't really understand, what all our options are. So I think we, as folks who love higher ed, the institutions we serve, as well as just the industry in general, have a responsibility to help raise the larger consumer IQ about what education itself looks like.
Yeah. Really. Yeah. It's just like, all this has got me thinking, just because I'll probably be like just stewing over it after our conversation.
That's the point of this, right? Your shows are
right,
great.
Exactly. Yeah. This is great. So I think in terms of, some of this stuff, I think it obviously very connects closely, to the work you're doing. These are like kind of like the professional geek outs. So I don't know if you like kind of go out of bounds in terms of like other just higher ed related stuff. Obviously, like it's the idea of like your marketing academic program. So it's like sort of in your wheelhouse to understand like how people are pursuing learning and succeeding and persisting and those sort of things. But then like obviously a very large ecosystem in higher ed of all the different functional areas and those sort of things. But so I guess just in terms of, maybe it can kind of segue to any like sort of personal interest of yours, but just like any of these like hobbies and things that you would be doing, kind of like after work or on a commute, or, like you have like this downtime, like these hobbies and these interests, like how do you see them like positively contributing to your life, whether again, it's just sort of like personal fulfillment or, it just like helps you to do a better job. Like what kind of comes to mind there in terms of like these things that you're just doing because you're just, so curious and, just so interested to learn, like how are they providing value to your life?
All right, let's go woo-woo. Let's go all the way. So first job in higher ed, web content manager at Lewis University. Goal was to move to a responsive web design, as well as completely reorganize all content, which involved me interviewing 80 academic program chairs in 12 months and rewriting all their website content. It was an awesome, ambitious project. What it made me realize is that everything is the exact same thing. When I talked with our program chair of the marketing department and of math and of computer science and biology and music, when you got to, what is your program about and what are you learning, we're all learning the same thing. There are some universal truths in this world that look a little bit different depending on what field and what prism you're looking at them through, but it's all the same thing. Getting good at one thing means you're going to get better at that other thing as well. And, I think we all understand that kind of intuitively in terms of what liberal arts means, this well-rounded generalism that helps us succeed anywhere and understand these principles that are relevant anywhere. But it wasn't until I interviewed all those program chairs that I realized that we're all playing the exact same game. And so for me, what that means when I look at things is I'm a marketer and I'm a writer, and I like the art of persuasion. I'm a missional-driven marketer in terms of that's why I work in higher education. But I want if I had a killer cigarette campaign, I wouldn't feel great about it because at the end of the day, I'm convincing more children to smoke. So to me, a killer Joe Camel Part 2 that I concocted would not be a great use of my talents. But in general, as a marketer and as a writer, I see what are some things the world needs to know and what is the most creative way to get them there. So in general, I'm an antsy guy who loves building stuff, and so it helps me to always have kind of a side hustle and a side project. Almost none of them are ever revenue generating or even designed to be. In 2008, Barack was leading the polls, and I saw in him expectations placed on this man that I knew he could never live up to. He did pretty good, actually. But I saw this idea of the savior complex we put hope in for this man. And so I started a project called Why Every President Sucked, which just went through and detailed each and every president's, maybe even our heroes, Lincoln, Jefferson, Adams, how did they suck beyond just like they owned slaves? They did some crazy things too. And so me doing that research and understanding that was helpful to me in terms of learning these somewhat mythical heroes that we think about when we think about our president. And if I had Lincoln in here right now, what he could do. If I had Reagan here today, what could he do? Seeing the frailty of these men written in short form, this coffee table book and that I created, I thought was helpful into hopefully gearing people's expectations down about what a president could be. The funny thing is, I think our most recent president might have tipped that scale in the opposite direction in terms of maybe we want someone with a little higher expectations. But in general, that was a fun project for me in terms of I like doing it and I like creating it. I'm a marketer and I'm a writer. I wrote songs for all the presidents. There's AP US history teachers throughout the country that utilize my songs in their curriculum to walk through the presidents. To me, that's really fun. I haven't earned a penny on it. There's no real way to do it. But I love being a part of helping people think better. The two couple of things I'm working on right now, and is it okay if I just start talking about these
Go
random
for it.
projects?
Yeah, we'll link them out. Yeah.
So and again, it's really not a publicity thing. It's just a fun way to keep my mind active in something outside of my primary field. But I have a daughter who's 7 years old now, and she, as if we're watching a show and there's a kiss, she'll cover her eyes. I'm like, boy, what have I done, or what is she seeing where she just innately thinks sex is bad, and that's probably not what she's thinking. But in general, there is some of this is wrong. There is some stigma that she has encouraged, and I grew up deeply evangelical, where sex is very 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 bad until your wedding day, then it's all of a sudden good, and that cognitive dissonance is very hard to process for a lot of us who grew up religious. So I started thinking about what does that sex talk look like? Or is it a talk, or is it a conversation that starts when your child is 3 and, ends never? And so what I did was I just interviewed people, through SurveyMonkey, asked some quantitative and some qualitative questions about their sex talk, what they liked about it, what they didn't, how they would rank it, their political and religious beliefs, that kind of thing, and got some, fantastic answers that selfishly are going to help me give better sex talks to my daughter and now my newborn son as they get older. But I see huge value in that of boy, I should document these and put these together. And because when I ask my friends about, have you talked to your kid about sex yet, and they're like, oh no, like I'm getting to it. My wife's been nagging me about it, but I haven't done it yet. And I'm like, your son's 13. Like you're too late on this. And my sex talk. How PG is this? Is this podcast?
Well, I could just mark it explicit, I guess. Yeah,
it's not explicit, but it's a little bit of a sidecar. But
sure.
7th grade, my dad picks me up from basketball practice at school. He's very nervous and very awkward. Not a deep talker. He is also a higher ed geek himself. But very nervous in the car ride home. And in my head, I'm writing my own story, and I'm thinking, boy, he's gonna tell me my parents are getting a divorce. We're about 3 minutes from the house. We're at a stoplight. He turns and looks at me kind of awkwardly and says, "So, do you know what a scrotum is?" Out of the blue, we had not been talking about any of this stuff ahead of time, just launches into it, completely caught back. And I'm in 7th grade, pre-internet, and I say, I think so. The truth was, no, I did not know. And he looks back at me and says, "It's your ball sack." And it is silence, Dustin, for the next 2.5 minutes as we ride home in silence. And I could only imagine that eventually he went in, I ran up to my room and hid, and he went up and talked to my mom, and she said, "So how did it go?" He said, "Oh yeah, we had the talk, went great." I'm guessing he was coaxed or cajoled into saying, you need to have this with your adolescent son, but there is just some sort of like, I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do this comfortably. And even, 20 years later, where I think the sexual ethic in this country is changing and there is less shame and stigma, there is some sort of, we don't exactly know how to do this well. We know that we did not like our own, or we did, and we can learn from that. But what should that look like today? And so again, this goes back to my whole thing of this idea of communicating ideas and disseminating information and elevating the consciousness in general and making people smarter is just a universal obsession with me. And so while the majority of my time goes into thinking about how can that kind of mindset elevate higher ed, just in general, how can we elevate thought and intelligence in general? Do we have time for one more quick one that I'm really obsessed about right now?
Go for it.
The guy in the office right next to me, he's a big, imposing, bald man who, a guy that, if you're walking down the street, you're not super excited about having to pass late at night. And we're a year and a half into our relationship where we discover we're both deep philosophy lovers. And I had this weird thinking of like, why did I learn this a year and a half ago? Why did we talk about the weather and small talk and nonsense for a year and a half when we could have been talking Nietzsche and Freud? And so that idea about how to make the private more public is something that I am obsessed with right now. And so what I did was I created a shirt, those Helvetica shirts that are like bacon strips and bacon strips and bacon strips, or like Ross and Rachel and Monica and Joey. And so it's the idea of like, it's like code. It's like, look, it's like wearing a band T-shirt. It's like, wearing a Wilco shirt. And you're like, oh, Wilco, yeah. Speaking of which, for all you Wilco fans out there, Glenn Cochi was my drum teacher in Naperville, Illinois, growing up. So Wilco's drummer was the guy who taught me how to play the drums. Small world.
Yeah. Fun fact, yeah.
But that idea of like, okay, I've got to start being more public with the fact that I'm obsessed with Ricky Gervais and Carl Pilkington, and I'm into Stoicism, and I listen to Bon Iver and I'm into Paleo and Spin Class, and it's like, this idea about what if there is someone 2 doors down from me in my neighborhood that I would be hetero life mates with if I simply knew the overlap of Venn diagram that we had in our interests and relationships. And so, I think on the dating apps like eHarmony and Match.com, you have some sort of kind of personality tests like that, but I still see Dustin's face and I choose left or right before I get to learn anything about him.
Right.
And so as a happily married person, for me, it's more of a, how do I find new friends? But in general, this idea of how do how do like-minded Dustins find like-minded Dustins? And the fact that no one has solved for that well, or at least I have not seen it, is to me this hugely critical problem that I'm surprised, more people haven't gotten behind. So in general, thank you for letting me just kind of riff, just because if any of you are interested in these problems, I would love to talk to you because I'm kind of obsessed with them. But that's what I love about higher education people in general and higher ed marketing people in general is we are obsessively curious and creative and want to make the world a better place. And we're just crazy enough to think that we might be the ones to help get it done. So that's why I like being friends with you and being a member of these kinds of communities, is because it's my favorite people in the world who just want to figure out the world and run.
Yeah, that's really like a lot of cool stuff, because I think like it's something now, because I think like side hustles and these sort of things have become so like, I don't know, it's become mainstream, and they become like almost like fashionable, like everybody's doing them and some sort of things. And there's like a lot baked into that, because sometimes it's like, well, I'm working a second job because I have to survive. This is not like a cool like side project. So it's like acknowledging that, where it's like, okay, people need to be more like gainfully employed. Like we need to be talking about like compensation, whatever. But then the other part of it of like that you can get so much positive benefit from like doing like why all the presidents sucked kind of thing. And it's just like, I don't need it to make money. Like I got a lot from it. I know that other people did as well. And just like, if you did put the pressure on it to try to like, milk some teachers for their like very few dollars that they already have, it's like, yeah, like it wouldn't have, like it wouldn't have helped as many people. And it would, you would have been like, oh, well, this was a failure because it didn't make a lot of money or whatever. Like, but it's like recognizing the value it gave for you, not needing it to make money. And, it's just something to sort of keep busy with and those sort of things. And, also because I feel like I keep saying this, and it was represented in what he said about like the president's like, now, like, because there's always all these like scandals coming out about like anybody, like they have this like social media post from who knows when, like, and they said something really insensitive and whatever, and some people are able to like endure it better than others, but like that nobody should put like all of their like reverential like focus on like one person, because it's like we're all humans, none of us are perfect, like something about every president made them suck, like or they did a thing that was not great, so it's like there's no like perfect individual, because it's like they do make a mistake and you're like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe it, like that person, like what, it's like because like they're human, they're so people. Like everyone has flaws, so that's like fascinating.
And I'll give you to riff off your idea of pursuing things because you're legitimately curious about them. I can link it back to a more industry related thing about it. So a year ago or so, we were playing around with some content marketing ideas for Helix, and I just decided to go down the street, work in a Starbucks for 2 weeks, and write the enrollment growth playbook, which is, 120 pages hardcover of here's how to think about positioning and branding and marketing strategy and enrollment operations and success coaching. And here's how to think about, if you're creating Ramsdell University, here's how to think about that at a very, very high level. And I didn't write it all by myself. I have amazingly brilliant people here at Helix who helped inform me. But that was fun to kind of gather all those thoughts, and the day that we launched that internally at Helix, I had a 500 inquiry goal for the year, KPI set for me. The day we launched the enrollment growth playbook, we got 1,300 downloads, and so something about it just struck the industry, and I think it's not something about it. It's we are curious people who want to do our jobs well. And so if we can create things that help us think better and help us do our job better and even maybe help us look better in front of our boss, there's going to be a huge response to it. So I was super excited about that, but I also learned that a lot of people didn't read it. And so my next step out of curiosity was, what if I turn it into a video game? What if I turn this 120-page book into a very short little 10-minute old school type click and point video game where it is an enrollment growth hero. It is called Enrollment Growth Hero. You can play it if you'd like, who goes around campus and meets with his VP of marketing and meets with his provost, meets with his president, and he is kind of the bridge maker, or she, to create this enrollment growth plan for the future of the university. And I did it because I liked the idea of having to create a computer game. It did almost nothing in terms of interest. To me, it was so exciting to me. I had such an interest in it. There was almost no people who wanted to play it. And I think the reality is because C-level higher ed is still, unfortunately, 60-year-old white male. And so the idea of going back to a King's Quest looking 90s video game for me had some nostalgia, did not for that 60-year-old clientele. But I personally loved the idea of like, what would it take to make a video game? And I had to learn all these things and work with programmers. And so part of this is, you can't always see into the future, but do big things that even if they're failures, you'll learn from and your team will learn from, and just try some. So while it was embarrassing to come back to my president and our COO and say, this kind of underperformed what I thought it was going to, it was small ball in terms of the money we had to put into it, and it was a good learning for all of us. And so being a part of an organization where you have the freedom to think big, play, and try things is just so critical if you are just this insatiably curious person who wants to grow and wants to build. Finding a culture that allows you to do that is so critical.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I'll have to go check out that game. It sounds just like, I don't know, because I kind of have a soft spot for that. I'm just like, I've played video games my entire life, and just
I put game in complete brackets in terms of it is kind of like a running yes/no dialogue that you cannot do anything wrong in. It's a different way and a quicker way to explore some of those same concepts. But for the higher ed world, we learned that a hardcover book was much more interesting to that audience. And again, no matter who you're working with, whether they're students or whether they're adults, learning more about your audience by trying and playing and testing and seeing what works is just so important.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess we'll do the last two questions like rapid fire here for the sake of time. So anything that you're reading, watching, and or listening to that you just want to just kind of give a tip of the hat to really quick that we can include in the show notes, just anything you're excited about.
Reading, watching. So Dustin is very familiar with the Connect EDU podcast network. It's one that both of our podcasts are a part of, and I literally do just listen to every single show. I have a soft spot for higher ed, but that network specifically is putting together and putting out some amazing content. And so whether you're in student affairs or you have a job related to enrollment growth, you can find a show that will make you do your job better. I think right now I am obsessed with Benjamin Franklin after reading the Walter Isaacson biography. And so I think it's funny as us who are just these perpetual continuous learners, seeing some of the things that he's thinking through, 200 years ago about, the government is so slow moving. Shouldn't we just have like smaller groups of like-minded people who get together and think through things and just build stuff in their town? It's like, I think that's like what Dustin and me and our friends are doing too. It's just fun seeing the similarities and seeing that the exact same problems that existed 200 years ago have some of the same solutions. So that one's been incredibly exciting for me. Higher education specific. If you're a marketer, that's probably not an ad. The Ad Week podcast is incredibly helpful because I think if we stay in the higher ed marketing bubble, we're staying about 8 years behind the rest of the world in terms of what we're doing from an advertising standpoint. So that's probably not an ad. That's probably an ad. The Ad Week podcast is quick 30 minutes. They have their top editorial team on that, helping talk through innovations in advertising technology, in creative, in terms of the agency world and what media buying looks like now that it's more of an art than a science, or the combination of thereof. From a professional development standpoint, if you find a Connect EDU podcast you like as well as that Ad Week podcast, that's a pretty good use of your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate that little nod there. Because I love all the shows on there. I love all the people that do them. So I always like to give them a shout out. But Yeah, so last question. So maybe just one thing that you are looking forward to. Always like to end the show on an optimistic note. So yeah, what are you looking forward to?
In the world, what am I looking forward to? I'm looking forward to finances not being the thing that's keeping people from getting an education. And that was the thing that drew me to higher ed 10 years ago when I thought we were really close. I think corporate sponsorship might get us there closer. My daughter's 7. What's going to be out there when, she's 17. But I mean, it exists right now where if you want to go to school but don't know how to pay for it, you can go get a job at Starbucks and go to school for free. And there are dozens of companies like that, and there's going to be hundreds. And that changes the game. And then accessibility is no longer the game. Completion is the game. And that's a very different game and a challenge that we might not be fully focused on. I mean, if you look at the retention rates in higher education, they're abysmal. And so what does that mean in terms of, it's part of that a financial reality? Yes, the majority of it honestly is. But what does that mean from a student experience standpoint, or the fact that students aren't valuing the education that we're giving them? How do they, have an Amazon transaction or this Disneyland experience where it feels like this organization knows them and is seeking to delight them, and they come to higher ed and it's so different. How do we get closer to that customer experience, and how do we not have people on our higher ed teams that are fundamentally and focused on the customer experience and thinking about how to Disneyfy, not from an entertainment standpoint, but just from they know me, they understand me, they're here to support me. As higher ed is moving in that direction, that's what I'm excited about.
Very cool. Yeah, it's good stuff to be excited for, and I think it's like well positioned to do that. And I think it sometimes like necessity driving that innovation kind of thing. But no, yeah, I appreciate you sharing all that you did and mentioning a lot of great stuff for people to check out. Some for fun, some for kind of fulfillment and learning and those sort of things. So we'll have links to everything down in the show notes for folks to connect with, and ways to connect with you as well if, like you said, they're interested in kind of keeping the conversation going there. So just thanks again, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon. And at least I don't just always like seeing what you're cooking up over there for your show, and appreciate the work that you're putting into that as well. So, just thanks again.
You're the best. Thanks so much for having me on, and always a great opportunity. I just love the opportunities to get to pick your brain. So, that some people got to eavesdrop in on it today.
This podcast is part of the Connect EDU podcast network, bringing together diverse voices in the higher ed community. Check us out on Twitter at ConnectEDUPod or at connectedu.network. Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek podcast.